Karen Whitlock always believed the rules didn't just belong in the neighborhood, they followed her wherever she went. As president of the Cedar Pines HOA for nearly a decade, she had turned the once laid-back community into a rigidly controlled village where every flower bed was inspected and every mailbox had to meet her standards. But no one ever imagined she'd try to enforce her HOA rules at a public grocery store in the moment she did. The entire community found out what she was really made of. If you've ever lived under a power-hungry HOA president or just love stories where justice finally wins, stick around, because this is a takedown you don't want to miss. Subscribe to Sham Stories for more unbelievable drama like this. It started on an unusually humid Tuesday morning in early August. The grocery store, Sunny Mart, was buzzing with midweek shoppers. Moms picking up school snacks, seniors hunting down coupons, and a handful of professionals grabbing quick lunches. Karen, dressed in her signature beige slacks, button-up blouse, and pearl earrings, strode through the sliding doors with a steel cart and a harder attitude, although Cedar Pines had no jurisdiction outside its wrought iron entrance gate. Karen's clipboard was still tucked under her arm. She walked through the store like she owned it, eyes sharp and scanning for what she considered problem behavior. The first offense in her mind was the unattended child near the bakery section. A little girl, perhaps 7 years old, was admiring cupcakes while her mother was 2 aisles over picking out sandwich bread. Karen stood by the girl with arms folded, waiting for the mother to return. When she did, Karen launched into a lecture about community safety, child supervision, and how this kind of parenting doesn't meet Cedar Pines standards. The mother, bewildered and unaware who this woman even was, apologized politely and rolled her cart away. But Karen wasn't done. She jotted a note on her clipboard, which made no sense in a public store, and glared after her as if she had issued a ticket. Karen's next target was an elderly man, Mr. Callahan, a war veteran who lived 2 streets down from her in Cedar Pines. He was slowly placing canned goods into his cart when Karen approached. "Ray, I couldn't help but notice your recycling bins were placed at the curb a full 12 hours early," she said in her artificial sweet tone. Mr. Callahan blinked at her. "We're not in the neighborhood right now, Karen. Let it go." Karen's face stiffened, but she smiled through gritted teeth. "Rules are rules no matter where we are. Reflects on our community." An employee stocking shelves overheard the exchange and chuckled under his breath. Karen turned toward him like a hawk. "Is there a manager available? I'd like to report inappropriate conduct." The employee, barely 20, shrugged. "Sure, lady. Right up front." As she marched away, Mr. Callahan muttered, "She's lost it," and it seemed like she truly had. Karen spent the next 40 minutes stalking the aisles, like a neighborhood patrol officer. She scolded a teenage boy for wearing a hoodie indoors, told a couple they were standing too close to the eggs, and made a scene when the deli counter took more than 3 minutes to hand her a pound of turkey. Staff began to murmur among themselves. Shoppers whispered and kept their distance. Phones began to appear, people discreetly recording the bizarre woman who seemed to think she ruled the store. But the real breaking point came near the checkout lanes. Lisa Monroe, a 34-year-old single mother and resident of Cedar Pines, was buying a week's worth of groceries with her daughter in tow. Lisa had always flown under the radar, friendly but private, responsible but not afraid to bend a few rules. When life required it, her grocery cart was full. Cereal, milk, paper towels, cleaning supplies, snacks for her daughter's lunchbox. Karen zeroed in like a hawk. "Excuse me, Lisa," she said loudly enough for nearby customers to hear. HOA guidelines specify no bulk purchases of community essentials during heat advisories. You've exceeded the acceptable paper towel allowance. Lisa blinked. "We're in a grocery store. HOA rules don't apply here." Karen waved her clipboard. "Rules follow us, Lisa. We represent Cedar Pines." That was it. Lisa didn't yell. She didn't back down. She calmly said, "Karen, if you don't get out of my way, I'm calling security." Karen barked. "Go ahead. I'll file a formal report." "I'm documenting this." She raised her phone and started recording. So did 3 other shoppers nearby. Within minutes, a manager arrived. Karen tried to explain that she was enforcing neighborhood order. The manager, barely keeping a straight face, informed her she had no authority in the store and asked her to leave. Karen refused. Police were called. Shoppers surrounded the scene, watching in disbelief as Karen insisted she was doing her duty. When the officers arrived, they calmly listened, then escorted her outside, warning her not to return if she couldn't behave. Karen's face flushed crimson as people clapped and filmed her walk of shame. That evening, the videos hit social media and Cedar Pines. But Karen wasn't going to take the humiliation quietly. That moment marked the beginning of a one that would bring her entire legacy crashing down. What started with a grocery aisle confrontation would unravel. Something far darker hiding beneath the pristine gates of Cedar Pines. Karen didn't sleep well the night after the grocery store incident. Though she'd been publicly embarrassed, forcibly escorted from a store, and turned into the subject of at least 3 viral videos, none of it humbled her. Instead, she doubled down on her belief that she was the only one standing between Cedar Pines and chaos. She stayed up until 2 a.m. writing a formal 8-page report titled Public Conduct and Community Image Guidelines and sent it to the HOA board with an urgent request to implement emergency disciplinary procedures for any resident who disrespected the neighborhood AF property. Her email subject line read, "Unraveling begins with one thread," but the response she got wasn't what she expected. HOA board members, most of whom had quietly tolerated her for years, replied with vague acknowledgments or no response. At all, a few even replied with, "We should probably let this blow over." Karen wasn't used to being ignored, and it only fueled her outrage. The following day, she walked the neighborhood with renewed purpose, clipboard tighter in her grip, but the atmosphere had changed. People who once waved reluctantly now closed their blinds. A group of teens on skateboards purposely rode through her cul-de-sac without helmets, just to taunt her. And when she tried to stop them, they sped off laughing. She spotted Lisa Monroe walking her dog and immediately crossed the street to confront her. "You've embarrassed this community. You've brought shame to our gates," Karen hissed. Lisa didn't stop walking. "No, Karen, you embarrassed yourself. And people are finally done pretending you didn't." That afternoon, Karen called an emergency HOA board meeting. Only 2 of the 7 board members showed up, Tom Miller and Irene Douglas, both of whom looked exhausted and non-committal. Karen ranted for over 20 minutes, playing phone footage from the grocery store and claiming the store had violated her rights. Irene interrupted gently. "Karen, you don't have jurisdiction at Sunny Mart," Tom added. "This is getting out of control. Need to focus on things that actually matter, like the cracked sidewalk fund and street lighting." Karen glared at them. "If we let one person disgrace our name in public, more will follow. What's next? Residents barbecuing in pajamas? Lawns decorated with gnomes? We need order." Irene sighed. "We need a break." She stood and left, followed by Tom. Karen sat alone in the HOA clubhouse, fuming. She stared at the community's framed charter on the wall, convinced they'd all gone soft. Over the next week, Karen became even more aggressive. She filed individual notices to 12 homes, citing everything from improper porch furniture to mailbox rust. Her clipboard became her shield and weapon. But instead of bringing people back into line, it united them against her. Residents started organizing a private Facebook group titled Cedar Pines United. Quickly gained over 100 members. They began sharing their own Karen horror stories, photos of her peeking over fences, demanding access to backyards, scolding children. For sidewalk chalk art, some stories were shocking. Others were infuriating. But all of them painted a picture of a woman who had overstepped her role by miles. Lisa, now a symbol of resistance, was quietly encouraged by neighbors to speak at the next official HOA meeting, though hesitant at first. She agreed. Word spread fast. The meeting, usually attended by a dozen retirees, was packed with over 70 residents. People stood along the walls, sat on folding chairs, even listened through open windows. Karen entered the room to find a sea of stares and a silence that made her skin crawl. She approached the podium, still believing she could talk her way back into power. "I know emotions have been high," she began, "but this community is built on structure. I've protected Cedar Pines for 10 years. What I did for our shared peace." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and Lisa stood. "Karen," she said clearly, "you're not protecting anyone. You're controlling people. You've turned neighbors into enemies and power into punishment. and it's time for that to stop." A round of applause followed. Then another resident spoke, then another. One elderly woman recounted how Karen fined her for planting 9 HOA-approved rose bushes. A young man shared how his autistic brother had been yelled at for walking on the grass. Story after story exposed Karen's pattern of bullying. Karen stood frozen at the podium, face stiff, clipboard trembling slightly in her hand. She opened her mouth to speak, but a board member, Tom, gently walked up and put a hand on her shoulder. "It's time, Karen," he said quietly. The board voted unanimously to suspend her from all HOA duties pending further review. Some residents cheered, others looked relieved. Karen left the building without a word, her clipboard dangling loosely at her side. But as she walked past Lisa in the parking lot, she paused just long enough to say, "This isn't over." And deep down, Lisa knew she was right, because Karen wasn't just a tyrant with rules, she was a storm that had only just started gathering again. The calm was temporary. The war wasn't over. Not yet. Karen spent the next 2 days holed up inside her house, peeking through blinds and scribbling into notebooks, utterly consumed by the idea that the community she built was crumbling beneath her. She was convinced that Lisa Monroe and the rest of the Cedar Pines residents were staging a coup. Their so-called unity group was just a front to destroy everything she had fought to preserve. Her clipboard rested on the kitchen table, still bearing the last citation she issued never delivered. She rewatched the viral videos over and over, dissecting every frame, every laugh in the background, every smirk aimed her way. The humiliation boiled her blood. But humiliation didn't destroy Karen, it ignited her. On the third day, she emerged dressed as always, beige slacks, pressed blouse, and polished flats. She walked directly to the HOA clubhouse, not to apologize or acknowledge her suspension, but to retrieve every file, folder, and email record from the office. Irene Douglas, who had been appointed acting president in Karen's absence, happened to be there. "Karen, you're not supposed to," she began, but Karen raised a hand sharply. "I'm reviewing documents for legal purposes," she snapped. Irene backed off, sensing something more dangerous than usual in Karen's tone. Karen spent 5 hours inside the office, scanning, copying, even taking photos of handwritten complaint forms. Then she vanished again. A day later, flyers began appearing on mailboxes around Cedar Pines. No logo, no signature. Just bold text that read, "Ask Lisa Monroe about her HOA violations. Ask what she's hiding. Ask why she's dividing us." Some people threw them away. Others posted them on the Facebook group, asking if this was Karen's doing. No one doubted it. Lisa herself found 3 taped to her garage door. But instead of panicking, she took a photo, posted it with the caption, "This is what fear looks like when power slips away." Her comment section exploded with support. But the story didn't stop there. That weekend, during the community's long-planned fall picnic at Cedar Pines Park, Karen arrived uninvited. She walked in like nothing had happened, waving politely, ignoring the glares. When Irene politely asked her to leave, Karen smiled and said, "I'm still a resident, Irene. You can't ban me from a park." Lisa, helping serve food, saw the interaction and came over. "Karen, this isn't about where you're allowed. It's about how you've made people feel unwelcome for years." Karen didn't respond. Instead, she walked over to a folding table, picked up a hot dog, and took a seat like she belonged. The atmosphere shifted, tension replacing laughter. Parents pulled kids a little closer. Conversations grew quieter. That's when Lisa did something unexpected. She walked over, grabbed the mic near the DJ table, and said, "Hey everyone, just for a moment. I know we've all had our own experiences lately, some of them difficult, some of them public. But I just want to say this picnic is about community, not control. Let's not let old energy poison new beginnings." Applause broke out again. Karen stayed seated, eyes narrowed, lips pursed. She left 20 minutes later without speaking to anyone. But that wasn't the end of it. The following Monday, Karen submitted a formal motion to dissolve the current HOA board. citing lack of professional integrity and emotional manipulation by unauthorized community groups. She posted a digital petition urging residents to restore her to leadership. Only 12 people signed it out of over 300 homes. Most of the community had finally seen her for who she was. The next week, someone spray-painted Cedar Pines United on the sidewalk outside the clubhouse. Karen reported it to police as vandalism. Others saw it as a statement. Meanwhile, Lisa began organizing a proposal to limit presidential terms in the HOA charter, something Karen had blocked multiple times during her reign. Irene supported the idea. Tom, too. And over 50 residents signed it within the first 24 hours. Karen was running out of tools. No more citations. No more fines. No more fear. But she still had her voice, and she wasn't going to be silenced. She began standing near the community entrance every morning, waving down cars, handing out printed newsletters titled Truth in Cedar Pines, filled with exaggerated claims about board misconduct, community decay, and of course Lisa Monroe. Most people didn't take them. Some threw them away on the spot. But a few read them, and that was enough for Karen. Because to her, control wasn't about numbers. It was about staying in the fight. Lisa, however, stayed calm. She focused on pushing the term limit vote forward, encouraging open board meetings, and starting monthly volunteer days to bring residents together. Children began drawing with sidewalk chalk again. Seniors started holding walking groups without fear of being scolded. Slowly, life in Cedar Pines began to feel like a community again. And though Karen lingered at the edge, always watching, always judging, her influence was shrinking. But deep in her heart, she still believed she could turn it all around with one clever move. And that move was coming. Karen's final move came 2 weeks later, and it caught everyone off guard, just as Cedar Pines had begun to stabilize. With residents enjoying a few weeks of relative peace and quiet, a single email reignited the flames. The message arrived in inboxes with the subject line, "Urgent Neighborhood Security Breach," sent from a generic account, signed simply Cedar Watch. It claimed there had been several instances of rule violations, property damage, and loitering tied to new board policies that weakened the HOA's grip. Attached were blurry photos of children skateboarding, dogs off leash, and what looked like a garage door left open overnight. At first it seemed like a harmless scare tactic, but then came the Kikara Private Security Patrol was being arranged to monitor all public areas within Cedar Pines for the next 30 days. Karen had hired them herself. No one knew how she managed to convince a security firm to accept her personal funding without board approval. But the very next evening, 2 uniformed guards in unmarked vehicles began slowly circling the neighborhood. Some residents were alarmed. Others were furious. Irene immediately called for a cease and desist, and Tom drafted a formal notice to the security company. But the guards claimed they had a contract paid in advance. Lisa, watching from her porch, saw one of the guards photographing her daughter's bike left on the driveway and knew this had gone too far. The following morning, Lisa called an emergency meeting not at the clubhouse, but in the local community center, 5 blocks outside the neighborhood. Flyers went up, emails were sent, and residents packed the room to capacity. This time, there were over 120 attendees. And this time, Lisa wasn't alone. She stood beside Irene, Tom, 3 other board members, and even 2 former residents who had moved away during Karen's reign. Lisa took the microphone and didn't waste a second. Not Cedar Pines was built on respect, not fear. And today, we say no more to power without permission. No more spying, no more threats. No more unauthorized patrols creeping past our homes. Thunderous applause echoed through the room. One by one, residents stood to share their stories. A teenage girl talked about Karen yelling at her for wearing headphones while jogging. An elderly man recounted being reported for walking too slowly near the clubhouse. A woman with a baby recalled how Karen once tried to tell her when her stroller was allowed on the sidewalk. The stories piled up, a damning flood that painted a clear picture of years of control, paranoia, and manufactured fear. When it was Irene's turn, she announced the HOA board's unanimous vote to permanently ban Karen from holding any HOA office, now or in the future. A formal restriction was also filed with the city council, preventing her from initiating private security measures or public action without board clearance. Karen, who had not been invited to the meeting, arrived late and stood outside the center's window, watching the applause, the smiles, the togetherness that no longer included her. She didn't come inside. She turned around and walked away, alone. The next day, the security guards left. Their contract had been nullified. By the end of the week, the HOA board passed Lisa's term limit proposal, ensuring no precedent could ever again serve beyond 4 years. The Facebook group, once used for resistance, became a space for potluck planning and garden sharing. Children returned to the sidewalks with chalk and rollerblades. Neighbors waved again, not out of fear but out of trust. And Lisa ran for HOA president. She said the title didn't matter, only the people did. Karen sold her house 3 months later, quietly. No goodbye note, no warning. A moving truck early one morning and a for sale sign left behind. No one missed her. But the lessons she left behind became permanent fixtures in Cedar Pines. Rules could be written. Power could be claimed, but community, that had to be earned. And when it was threatened, the people always had the final say. Justice didn't always come with sirens or judges it. Sometimes came with chalk, laughter, and a single voice saying, "Not today." If you believe that power without kindness always loses in the end, and that neighbors should protect one another instead of policing each other, then be sure to subscribe to Sham Stories for more true tales of everyday people standing up to injustice and winning.